PhD in history at the University of California, Berkeley in 2019, and is currently a postdoctoral fellow at the Cogut Institute for the Humanities and the Department of History at Brown University. Now, she specializes in the history of Vietnam, Southeast Asia, print culture, and libraries, with an upcoming book manuscript titled Reading and Misreading: The Social Life of Libraries and Colonial Control in Vietnam, 1865 to 1958. Now, she teaches courses in Southeast Asia, comparative empires, history of information and classification, memory and diaspora, print culture, and the history of the book. We are so pleased to have Cindy here today. Please give her a warm welcome.
Okay. Hi everyone. Thank you so much, Donna and Anna, for organizing and bringing me here. It is really such an honor. I say that like from the bottom of my heart. I've been thinking about coming here and talking and brainstorming about how to be honest about what I do, but also to be relevant and helpful to all of you. So I'm really excited for today. So first of all, my name is Professor Nguyen. I'm a scholar of modern Vietnam, and today I'm going to talk about Indochina history. How I'm going to organize this talk is really oriented to be thinking about why I started studying Indochina. And I hope that through this talk, I could actually then inspire you to think about why you do what you do. So to begin, why did I even start thinking about colonial Indochina, about the histories of Vietnam? Firstly, I was raised on stories. I was raised on stories of my mom giving birth to me in a refugee camp. I was born in 1988 in a refugee camp in Malaysia when my family fled by boat from South Vietnam into the night. We ended up, my mom didn't know that she was actually 3 months pregnant with me when she fled with my dad, my older sister, and my older brother, who were both 4 and 3. By the time we found land, which was about 6 days by water, and we were accepted to stay on this refugee camp in Malaysia, and then she found out she was pregnant. So we lived there for about a year thinking, and then very much that story shaped my identity, because it wasn't just a story of something distant and far away. It was a story of me and my family. But growing up, being raised with such heavy, difficult stories, and growing up in America, I was constantly really confused as a child. I wondered why my family left Vietnam. I wondered why we left, why the war happened. I wondered why my family survived while others didn't, or others wanted to leave but they couldn't. And growing up in California, while there were a lot of Vietnamese Americans, I just felt so confused most of the time. I also felt confused because I wanted to understand what was this country of Vietnam, what was it like before the war, what is the history of Vietnam beyond understanding from a very American-centric or European-centric perspective. Because of that, I grew really close to my mom because I would just ask her all these things, like, what did you eat growing up? What was school like? But also she told me a lot about what it was like going to school and being a child during the war. And because of that, it shaped who I am. And so this is a photo, it's hard to see, but my mom carrying me, and there's a little body, my leg popping out. But this is us in Malaysia. I'm sorry, this is us in a relocation camp in the Philippines, and we were accepted to come to the United States. We were reprocessed in the Philippines. And we lived in Malaysia for about a year, and then the Philippines for about 6 months. So this is my mom carrying me, and I'm about 6 months old. And then this is my dad, my older sister, my older brother, my uncle. This was like a neighborhood kid that always bit my siblings, so we really didn't like, but it's now part of our family picture of this camp. This is actually a photo of us celebrating before we were accepted to come and move to the United States. So here we are sitting, eating all these amazing Vietnamese foods. There's little things like, what is this right here? Can you tell from this photo? The small bottle. Coca-Cola, right? That was very luxurious at that time to have Coca-Cola. It was a very celebratory moment. And these are other people who were at the camp celebrating with us. Here's my dad here. So, for me, my family's background, the story of how we came to America, and how I'm part of this part of history, very much shaped why I continue to ask questions. I was driven to understand all these aspects of my life, from thinking about memory and narrative and cultural history, and it really, it was just a struggle for me as a kid, because even though I grew up in the States, I remember learning in school about Vietnam, and all the times we talked about Vietnam were very much like started, basically Vietnam comes into existence in the 1960s, and that's because Vietnam basically is only told through the perspective of US involvement in Vietnam, and the conflict with North Vietnam. So for me, I was just like, wait, I think there's more to this story. There's a cognitive dissonance that existed because the stories that my mom told me about her childhood, about going to the mountain hillsides in the Lad, and having this very peaceful, beautiful life at a certain point, was very different from the story that was very much about like military conflict, political jockeying in DC, issues like propaganda and the anti-war movement. So like for me, it didn't make sense. So I wanted to continue to investigate how my family fits into this whole story of history. So because of that, I started to continue to find ways to understand Vietnam. And for me, like when you're trying to understand things, like the other thing is I will be asking questions. Please feel free to like ask questions as well. So I'll be posing questions to you. Just feel free to raise your hand or shout them out. And if there's something that doesn't make sense, do raise your hand and interrupt me, because I really want this to be more of a conversation. I don't want if you have a question, please ask it. For so long as a kid, I always felt afraid of asking questions, but this is an opportunity to engage. So for me, I was really excited to find ways of understanding Vietnam. And back then, what I did was I would go to the library. Right? I would go to the library, try and find books about Vietnam, look them up for more. And then when like the internet became popular, I started to Google Vietnam. So today, if you Googled Vietnam, what would you probably see?
Well, the first thing that comes up is the Wikipedia page that lists its calling code. Ho Chi Minh City is the largest city, and then the top question is Vietnam safe for tourists?
Oh, interesting. Is Vietnam safe for tourists? That's a top question. If you were to go into images, what might you find? Yeah. Yes.
Well, I think we would see pictures of like the Vietnamese countryside, like the glowing rice fields, the typical Vietnamese have, the villages, and probably some pictures of the war, maybe like Ho Chi Minh himself. And Ho Chi Minh, and probably like pictures of his mausoleum in Ho Chi Minh City.
Yeah, no, thank you. So you pointed to, or all of your contributions, thank you, to some visuals, right? We have a map, we have understanding like photos of the Vietnam War potentially, the country's flag, recognizing this as an official country, Wikipedia page providing background, and then you also pointed to a lot of really influential photos and imagery about Vietnam that you see throughout through searching. So you have like photos of conflict, you have photos of the helicopter which evacuated some of the U.S. embassy workers, as well as some other Vietnamese workers who worked with the embassy up. And then these images are very influential, but they're also very incomplete, right? And that's what I hope to kind of show through my own work and today's talk, is that there's other dimensions to understanding Vietnam's complex history. And that goes to this mission statement that I have here. Currently, my mission statement is to diversify the body of knowledge of Vietnam. It's important to think about what is out there and to recognize what is the existing knowledge and understanding about Vietnam. But for me, I also want to bring in my own kind of family's history, my own background, but also try and push the understanding of Vietnam and not be as American-centric, because this country has extensive thousands of years of history, a lot of culture. There's a lot of Vietnamese Americans, Vietnamese diaspora living around the world who are creating a different type of history and culture. Vietnam is also in a different political and economic moment right today, so it's important to also think about how history has different implications for all the different communities involved beyond America. So that's why I essentially started studying history. It was my own personal curiosity and commitment to understanding about my family, but it was also this drive to push knowledge about Vietnam and to share that knowledge with other people. My academic journey, so this is, I like to kind of contrast this photo a bit with my family photo here, just because I'm always surrounded by my family, my loved ones who have really helped me to be where I am. So this is my journey. I spent 4 years of undergraduate at UCLA. I grew up in California. My parents never, because of the war, never graduated middle school. And when they came to the States, they were already in their 20s, so they did take a few classes at community college, but really spent most of their life working and supporting 4 kids. So I was the first in my family to finish college. So I did 4 years of undergraduate. I continued on 2 years for a master's, 6 years as a PhD. And during that time, I had the chance to live and research and work in Vietnam and France. And now I work at Brown. And in that way, like for me, and I've been thinking a lot because I just recently got my PhD, I've been reflecting a lot on what that means. For me, it wasn't just about getting the academic degree. It was really a signal and a symbol for my family and the privilege I had being in America and getting to learn about something I cared about. And I hope that through talking about this a little bit, I can also help to inspire you to think about what it is that you care about and if that intersects with school and whatnot. In other words, I've also spent a lot of time in school. I spent a lot of time and energy in school, and because of that, and because of the nature of this talk, I'm actually also really excited to help to refine why I did that, and not just, I really thought it out. I could have been doing other things, but it was a long process. So I really want to talk about why I did what I did professionally, academically, and personally. So to get to more of the topic of our conversation, so why study Indochina? The major takeaway point, and for me to be truly, truly honest, I feel like I can't tell this to my colleagues, because my colleagues that study history, because everyone says like, oh yeah, this specific history, Russian 20th century literature is the most important thing, or like 19th century understanding of the word modernity is the most important, like very specific, kind of competitive ways of understanding history, but everyone claims that it's the most interesting thing ever. And for me, I wanted to be honest with all of you, I study Indochina not because it's interesting. It is, but it's different. But it's because it's important. And that's what keeps me doing it, even though there's so many other distractions or other things that I could be doing. And I am a person that loses focus really, really quickly. So I do it because it's important. And that's the primary takeaway that I wanted to share with you, is to do something that you feel is important. And because importance and significance actually stays or remains with you, because your interests and kind of changes with the weather, and in that case, think about what is important for you. So I kind of frame the discussion in 3 ways. Why study Indochina history, or why do I do what I do, has 3 different answers to that. 1, it's important. 2, I get to constantly learn and unlearn things that I thought were true, and then I constantly get to push myself and learn new things. And the 3rd reason is it's hard. So these are the 3 kind of responses to this question that I'm going to frame my discussion. So firstly, it's important. Besides the personal reason for me to understand about my family and my background, I also believe that the actual history is really, really important to understand. And it's important to understand because so much, I specifically focus on the colonial history, the French colonial history of Indochina, and the creation of national boundaries and national identity during this period shaped so much the national and contemporary borders and identity of the countries of Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. This has real current day repercussions. So I wanted to open it up. When I say the word Indochina, what am I talking about? I want to say the word Indochina means a lot of things. Historically, it also sometimes was used to mean all of Southeast Asia, but for my specific purpose, I'm studying French Indochina, which includes the nations, contemporary nations of Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam. Where is it? It's on mainland Southeast Asia. And when is it? The topic of my research and my study is primarily between 1887 and 1954. So this is a map of regionally for us to place our discussion today. When I think about Indochina, I think of mainland regions, primarily Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. So this is a map of Southeast Asia. And a little bit of context is that why were the French in Indochina? Why were the French in Southeast Asia? The primary reason for French involvement in this region was economic. There was an economic France at this time in the 1870s, a new government came to power, and they were really interested in legitimizing and strengthening their government both domestically and internationally. At this point, France was competing with Britain in many ways. It has been competing with Britain for many years, and France was interested in trying to find a trade route to China and India, specifically to have access to valuable products at that time, such as silk, tea, porcelain. So there's a lot of reasons as to why France was involved in this region, but the primary one is economic. I just want to point really quickly to this map to just show a little bit of the conquest history. Because the key thing here is that French encroachment into the region was actually quite uneven and happened in very piecemeal forms. First French influence happening first in Da Nang, or historically named Terrain, and then starting into Saigon, Cambodia, and then this Cochin China region. And the key takeaway point from this is that another map of this is actually a topography map. So the green areas are actually lowland areas, which have historically had a higher density of population. It's slightly more it's much more navigable, so then people could transit by ship and navigate the rivers and waterways, which means that it was economically a richer area. You also have a lot of lowland areas where wet rice farming occurred. So these are the areas in which France initially conquered as well as established its administrative apparatus. And the significance here is that it means that this area was much more infrastructurally developed for roads, hospitals, schools, and even today, if you think about the richest areas, the biggest cities in the Indochina area, it's primarily these lowland areas. I'm going to just show. I also wanted the key point here, too, is that France came in, but there were existing pre-colonial polities and competing polities in this mainland area. This is a map of the breakdown of all the geographic borders every year. I just wanted to point out, this is the Kingdom of Siam, and this is the Kingdom of Vietnam, which is modern-day Vietnam. So by this point, the reason why I wanted to show you this map is to show the different geopolitical polities from Siam, also Vietnam, and the Khmer Empire as well, having a comparatively fluid and combative range of geographical influence in the region. And by this point here is the French colonial period that we're talking about. So here's just a map of 12th century Cambodia. You can see that there's an extensive range of influence in this territory that's very different from the contemporary maps and the geographic breakdown of. So this is the pre-colonial different kingdoms of Laos. And the other takeaway I wanted to frame is that, remember the big takeaway point, this is important because the French colonial period basically formalized the divisions between Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam. And I wanted to point to other forms of geographic demarcations, and here we have a picture of the Mekong River on the right, which connects the countries today of China, Myanmar, Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam. And through French colonialization and actually creation of formal colonies, they tried to create a natural and new geographic borders. So here you have a map of all the roads that tried to basically, if you go to Vietnam today, there's actually a huge mountain range here, and France essentially created new roads to connect the Vietnamese territories and the Lao territories. So this is the official colonial breakdown during the French colonial period. Essentially, France ruled and governed the territory in 5 distinct geographies: Cambodia, Laos, northern Vietnam, which was referred to as Tonkin, Annam, and Cochinchina. Each had its own different legal breakdown, but France tried to also create all of the 5 territories as one unified entity. The takeaway point here is that essentially through colonialism, there was an attempt to make this region governable through French understandings, right? Space, of using maps, using borders, connecting the cities, the major cities from Hanoi to Vientiane in Laos and Phnom Penh and Saigon through roads. Yet the challenge here is that there was tremendous ethnic diversity. This is a geographic map showing the different ethnic groups and ethno-linguistic groups, so people were communicating in different ways. And the other key point too is that France built its empire really relying on collaborators. They worked really closely with the ethnic Viet group, which is the minority, my family's ethnic Viet, the minority population. You can see here highlighted in green in the lowland areas of Vietnam. So there's not much discussion about this, but there was actually, because of France allying itself with a lot of the ethnic Viet population, the ethnic Viet essentially internally colonized the other territories. That means that they were sent out, ethnic Viet were prioritized for administrative positions, they became more educated, they had more economic opportunity, they were sent out to regions such as Cambodia, into Laos, and into the highlands too. And because of that, this region of Vietnam was also more infrastructurally developed, such as schools, offices, light manufacturing, and roads. So just the big takeaway point here is, because of the imbalance in colonialism, it basically created and exacerbated the ethnic and regional tensions that have been carried on to today. You see a lot of, if you go to Vietnam today, most of the money, most of the development is still really, really concentrated in the lowland areas in the cities of Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City, which was previously Saigon. The boundary between Cambodia and Vietnam is still on the ground quite fluid, but there's a lot of policing at the borders that happens, and that bordering and this border control actually really happened and has its roots in the French colonial period. So the other key point I want to bring out is that I'm still learning. I'm learning a lot. There's a lot to learn still about Indochina. And I want to talk a little bit about some of the things I learned about the colonial period in Indochina, specifically in Vietnam. There were tremendous changes that happened. I pointed to some of the big transportation changes in building roads across territories and connecting regions that previously weren't really seen as a region. Because of the new forms of transportation, there's also extensive migration to cities and the creation of cities. New forms of people basically being able to communicate with one another, primarily in Vietnamese and French, and then the standardization of other languages such as Khmer and then Laos in Laos. And I just want to show a little bit of photos because I wanted to diversify your visual toolkit or toolbox of understanding what colonial Indochina looked like. So here's a photo of some paved roads, and then you have a large Vietnamese family together with a French administrative family here too. Transport infrastructure, so I pointed to how it connected all the way up to from China, all the way to Saigon. But you can tell that a lot of the road structure and railroads were focused on Vietnam and not as much in Laos, primarily because there's a lot of mountains and there's difficulty in that. But because a lot of the administration, the economic development was concentrated in Vietnam, it connected France and parts of Europe to Vietnam too. This is a tourist map that was targeted really towards French tourists who might want to travel to Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. So this can showcase how long or how the route you might take if you go by steamship or by flight. There's a picture of city life. So oftentimes when I show these photos, it seems people see it like, oh, that's great. There's like different types of infrastructural development and people have access to more goods or transportation, they can talk to each other and new technologies. But this is actually from a great resource, it's a graphic novel about the development of Hanoi during the colonial period. And you see here actually, because of the infrastructural development, you see the pushing out of previous communities. So here, basically, so the French Quarter was divided and created here for French expatriates who worked in the government primarily, or who were also rich and relocated to live in Vietnam, moving down here. So this is where you'll see like better sanitation, more access to different types of like foods and healthcare and things like that. And essentially, all the local Vietnamese populations were essentially quarantined into this smaller territory. This book is great because it actually talks about a lot of hygiene and issues with sanitation, disease, because of the gentrification or the quarantining of different populations. Here you also have a conflict between colonial administrators coming in and basically destroying previous religious temple territory or temple complexes, sacred sites, to build the seemingly quote unquote modern or French really understandings of what a city should look like. And through these developments, there are many that benefited and many who didn't. Because of the flood of new technologies, new money that's coming in, you also have new forms of community that were developing around Vietnamese who basically got to go to school and learn about the world and have access to new even this is Vietnamese in the 1930s learning about tennis and new social practices that were very much defined by a rising middle class. And through that, Vietnamese were thinking about what this change means. What's colonial modernization? How do I feel about these new technologies? How do we think about what is Vietnamese? What language should we speak in? Should we speak in Vietnamese or French? And there was both excitement, anxiety, and concern about these new ideas and technologies. And this is what I study. I study how people felt in the 30s about change. I find it very relatable because we're living in this current moment where there's a lot of technological changes, a lot of governmental changes, and there's a lot of anxiety, particularly in young people, about what the future looks like. So this is a showcase of debates about people making fun of and figuring out what the new world looks like. So this is a picture of this caricature who's like, oh, I'm going to be civilized, I'm going to be modern, so I will wear sweaters. But he can't figure out how to wear a sweater because it's kind of a weird outfit. It's very different from previous things. Here you also have, this is an advertisement for a new type of dress that was a little bit more bodily fitting in Vietnam. And it basically shows that this like beautiful glamour female wearing some makeup, jewelry, popular trends that were brought over really from France, but really articulated in new ways in Vietnam. And this is a funny commentary on just the drastic ways in which the landscape's changing. And he's like, look, I won't get run over on the streets by those cars because I'm walking on this really nice, clear walkway, but he realizes that there's a train. It's another urban danger that he's commentating on, but he's also telling people, hey, be careful. Like there are all these new fast things that that not everyone has access to, but could actually kill you because it's quite dangerous. So for me, I find a lot of my research is in these types of social commentaries, and it's really relatable because I find it akin to like BuzzFeed articles or YouTube videos today about like what you should do when you go to a different place or what's happening around our world, or even I'm sure there's like, you know those electric scooter things that there's like all these accidents are happening because it's like we don't know the proper like urban codes of how to use this and how to operate on the street. So there's all these kind of tensions, and I find that type of cultural conversation really exciting because I find it very relatable. So this is just a recap of all the major social transformations, technological transformations during the colonial period, especially experienced in Vietnam. And for me, I think about, these are the big questions when I study all these topics that seem big and expansive, is that I think about how these transformations create opportunities for some and actually disenfranchise others. I look at both sides. And then it inspires me to take a look today and think about today how these types of aspects transform the world today, thinking on a local level, on a national level, on a global level, and that's why I continue to study colonialism. The other key thing that is very inspiring and pushes me to think is that during thinking about tools of communication as a way to call out injustice. So during this time, you have the popularity of a lot of print media, like the ones that are commentating on different urban trends and whatnot. But there's also radio and different organizations who are calling out unfair legal justice system. So I mentioned before, there is an ethnic divide between Vietnamese, Cambodia, and Laos, but there is also tremendous racial injustice between the French and everyone else. So essentially the French were subject to a different law code where, and there's a lot of case scenarios of this where French would commit a crime, would accidentally hit like a pedestrian and injure them, but they would never get in trouble for that. Whereas vice versa, the Vietnamese person would get heavily fined or would get in prison and whatnot. So here you have some evidence of the first kind of protests that are breaking out. Many of those that protested actually ended up, I know there's a Cogut mass incarceration. So I did want to mention that the colonial prison was also this oppressive system that was developed during the French period to coercively suppress any form of dissent. Those that spoke up against the French, that spoke up against the French, and also petty crime too. They were all kind of forced into one prison system that was extremely brutal. You can see in this photograph here how the prisoners are actually kept. And it was very much linked to the unfair racist legal system. This is a case in which there were two key intellectuals, Cambodia and Laos, who were basically talking about like, what the future of Vietnam should be like, and essentially were also politically active in calling out French injustice. Right? And France claims to be bringing civilization and modernity, but not everyone has access, or some schools are extremely expensive, but is schools the way in which we actually, is that the only way in which we can provide, the French should be providing economic opportunity for others, we're privileging the cities. So they were basically very vocal. And Phan Chi Trinh passed away, but there was also, it coincided with the trial of Phan Boi Chau, who basically was arrested and called an anti-French. And he really was, he was calling for the overthrow of the French, but the French arrested him and then gave him essentially a show trial. So everyone was really angry because they saw in these two figures the potential for change, for a new equitable democratic and democratic government, for new opportunities. So this, you see a lot of young people basically coming out and seeing these two events as evidence of France being contradictory and actually not really honoring all the things that it was saying, like liberty, justice, equality, fraternity. Like France was not actually applying all these notions of democracy that they were hailing in France and also in its colonies. They were actually not carrying it out. It's testament that this entire trial. So in the rest of the time, I want to talk a little bit about what it is what is history and what does historical research actually look like on the ground and how hard it is, but why I keep doing it. So doing historical work is really, really hard, and you can kind of see like I'm already trying to rush through all these complex things. I'm trying to piece everything together, and the reason why it's hard is because at the root of what we do is I have to look at these primary sources they're limited and they're hard to find, sometimes they're difficult to read. And I'm working in a pretty recent period, recent in historical terms, like 1930s. If you're working in an older period, like the sources that you engage with could be, it could already be molded and broken down, like you might even not have access, they were destroyed by like the climate or political regime changes and whatnot. And then it's hard because it's also, I have to spend time, like I mentioned, I lived in France and Vietnam, working in the archives for 2 years, and I'm requesting documents, and then there's a lot of inadequacies or troubles that happen where the documents are not cataloged, so they're lost, or they say, there's all these things, or like things close, so it's really frustrating, tiring. Another time it's like, it's really exciting, because one day I found this photograph, and I was like, what is this? So this is called a primary source. I found this photograph, and there was a little caption, and I understood that in 1937, there was something called a bibliobus, or book wagon, in Cogut, China, which is the southern area of Vietnam, in front of the central market. And this market was a big retreat station for a lot of French, but also a lot of Vietnamese lived there. And this is what in history is called a primary source. It's like I found it, it's a historical document, and I really want to investigate what it is and why it is. So this is my approach to how I analyze sources. So these are the steps in which I do. The first thing I do is I look at it. What's going on? What do I see that makes me say that? And the next thing we do is I want to understand the context, because I have all these hypotheses of potentially what it is, and I know it's important because there's something that is a little bit intriguing or bizarre about it. So what I did was I started to investigate more, because I found that in the archive, and I found where this document was in a stack of other documents, which was basically a research study report made by the leading French director of the libraries in the 1930s, and he was researching libraries all over the country. And he researched public libraries and book wagons in the United States. He looked at different types of wagons of which we could use to develop this. And then I started to have this hypothesis, like, oh, he was researching this method to implement this type of project, right? And then I get, as a historian, the key thing is like I need to start diving into the sources. You find everything so interesting and so weird and so fascinating. But then it's like, okay, so why is this important? Because you have to take the step out and be like, okay, what does this show about history or politics or culture? So as I researched this, and this is a key part of my research in my book, is that I realized that colonial libraries, first of all, in Indochina, are connected to these international public library movements during that time. So this is a lot of the French libraries in Indochina, so colonial libraries, built its models off of American libraries and public libraries, right? But they also were trying to seek to improve literacy. Why? Why was literacy so important? And that's a question that I'm still trying to investigate. Is it important just because that's the understanding of what a library does and the library mission, the mission of the government, or does it have a deeper purpose, particularly in a colonial context, right? In a colonial context, if there's a lot of inequity between different race, between different class, and gender inequity as well. And then as I continued to research, I actually uncovered that the library project was also implicated in a huge propaganda project. In the 1930s, the librarian, as part of the head librarian of this Indochina project, was telling the administrator, essentially the president or the governor general of Indochina, saying, hey, we can actually flood the market with safe reading so that people don't distract themselves with dangerous reading, which is seen as readings about injustice or political subversive texts or people writing about how there should be social change. So the library saw itself as this role to promote like literature or safe reading or pleasant children's literature that could potentially offset discontent, popular discontent. Most of these books in the first few rotations were actually more French, and then there were more and more Vietnamese language books. And part of why they were French and thinking about language and literacy is that most people that knew French worked in administration or were elite families, but it also pushes us to think about how things are read. Things might be read and circulated, read orally and read to a group so people might understand. There could be someone reading in French but like translating to Vietnamese people to understand what is the story. And the stories are actually really popular stories like The Three Musketeers, other popular literature at that time, which was also translated to French. You have Sherlock Holmes, which is from English and then translated to French. You have Pearl Flux, The Good Earth, which is about China. You have other stories that were from China that were translated into Vietnam, into Vietnamese, such as Mulan, Romance of the Three Kingdoms. So these are the popular literature at that time. So these are the two kind of observational hypotheses that I have right now in my research, and it's this ambiguous, tenuous role that the library claims to be adding democracy, bringing access to literature and education and literacy, but actually is still a government project and tries to basically promote good literature or good reading, safe literatures to distract people, right? And then embedded within that political motive is a certain understanding of race, is to think that actually putting all this literature out there, you can kind of distract or confuse Vietnamese readers, and that to have political change was bad, right? And it would subvert the authority of the French government. So the other thing why this is hard is that I have to be really brave and make these statements based on the research that I've done. And I have to be brave because I know that I might not have access to everything yet, but I have access to what I have, and I know that by making the claim, I'm claiming what is significant and important, and I'm contributing, I'm sharing this story with all of you to make you maybe think about how you have access to ideas and information, maybe the political or cultural context you have behind there, but also to understand more about Vietnamese history, colonial history, and the complex ways in which things that seem seemingly good, like adding schools or increasing literacy, can actually have very stark racist or unequal forms of power within it. And I like that it's hard. Being hard makes me want to keep doing it because it's kind of scary and I feel like I'm not really sure of all the arguments, but I know that I'm trying to make an attempt. I'm saying this in the argument, but I also know that maybe in the future you can all become historians and then research more and actually undermine my argument, and that's fine. I know that my argument will not be the last state, and that's what research is being brave and stating a claim with your evidence and the work that you've done, but being okay with changing your argument, adding it, revising it, and making it better. So I want to leave a little bit of time so I could talk more about my research in the Q&A if anyone's interested in it. Essentially, I researched the history of libraries as kind of like a proto-internet to think about how people, particularly Vietnamese, have access to ideas, but then also how that information is shaped by the political context. And then I just wanted to kind of conclude so we have time for questions, is to recap. So I'm, again, Professor Nguyen, and I seek to diversify knowledge about Vietnam. I work on colonial Indochina because it's important. There's so many issues that occurred during the colonial period that has real living consequences today. I'm constantly learning. There's just so much to learn and understand about this changing period of history, this very dynamic period. And it's really, really hard, and that's what makes me curious and keep wondering. History is just one method of understanding the world. My personal mission statement is to also continue to learn about Vietnam and find new ways of understanding. And I see history as just one of these methods. And I actually have other ways in which I examine history and memory and cultures through film, poetry, and storytelling. I don't know if anyone's interested, but next week on Friday I'll be giving a talk on a film I made, which is a film here about me and my mom and the different words that I grew up with, Vietnamese words, such as Cogut, which translates literally to English as difficulty, but for me, it was used so much by my mom that it almost had this other meaning. Because Cogut meant just life. It meant that life would always kind of be a little bit difficult, and that's normalized, but it shows so much about my mom's life and how she really struggled during the war and raising her family in America, that it was going to be really difficult. So she gave me this word that she always used and made me braver to not be afraid of that difficulty. And next Friday I have this talk to showcase my film, which is a short film, and talk about what it means to translate across memory and space and understand history and understand yourself through the process.
Can you show the first 30 seconds of it?
Yeah. So these are the different words I was raised with. Meanings associated with memory. So the film explores my relationship to these words and how I translated them in different ways because my language of expression became English very young in America, but really my language of love and family was Vietnamese. So what it means to grow up with those two worlds that are intersecting in this very human, loving, special way with my mom. So, to conclude, I think about being a historian, an artist, or filmmaker as a way to become more compassionate and understanding others. Like for me, why I continue to do what I do, besides the fact that it's important, it's hard, I'm still learning, is that I feel like by really practicing my different tools and what we were doing earlier to look at this photograph and see the context it was in which it was created, it helps me to be more empathetic, to be compassionate, to try to figure out the context in which something was created, to understand the rationales from different people. And the second thing is to recognize that things change over time. And that's a little bit abstract, but for me it helps me to think about kind of the future and the past and how certain lessons that like my family tried to pass down on me, right? And down to me. But I take those lessons, I try to carry it and articulate it in a different way. The other side of this that things change over time is that when I make historical arguments, I recognize that I might make a claim, but maybe in the future it might change, and that's okay. It's all part of the process of learning, of sharing what you know and what you don't know, and that's what makes me really excited to continue being a historian and artist. So I want to thank you for your time and your feedback so far. This is my email. Feel free to reach out to me. You can take a photo of this or write down my email. And these are the websites that I share a lot of my work. In line with my goal of diversifying knowledge, I share a lot of my research essays, videos, this talk probably will also go on this research article, teaching material. I'm developing different teaching material on how to teach Histories of Cambodia and the Angkor Wat, or I'm teaching how to think about the Vietnam War in a very historic process. And then my arts work is on this different website called Just Reading, where I write poetry and navigate and think about language and memory in that way. Again, thank you. We have about 10 minutes for questions. So feel free to ask any questions. Right. Thank you for bringing up that very specific example. I actually, in my teaching, talk a lot about the inherent racism within a lot of racist historians during the time and understanding about places like Angkor as considered like a dead civilization or having roots in the West, which is completely inaccurate. And yeah, that really suggests and points to the point I was trying to make, which is that we have to be ready to make bold statements, but also to accept that we might be wrong. And that's what makes history really scary but fun. Yeah, thank you so much.
And on that note, let's